All right, well, thank you all for your patience. I'm excited to get this panel underway, even though we're a little bit late due to some internet connectivity issues, so very apropos for our evening tonight. So it's my pleasure to introduce our esteemed panel here. We'll be talking about Innovation for Good, a conversation about the internet's future. So a brief introduction to my fantastic panelists here. We have Aram Sinnreich, who is a professor and chair of the Communication Studies Division at American University's School of Communication. Sinnreich's work focuses on the intersection of culture, law, and technology, with an emphasis on subjects such as surveillance, critical data studies, intellectual property, remix culture, and music. He's the author of 5 books, including the forthcoming The Secret Life of Data, published later this spring. Next, we have Natalie Campbell, who is a Senior Director, North American Government and Regulatory Affairs at the Internet Society. She is passionate about analyzing how government actions could impact the internet and driving advocacy efforts to grow, protect, and defend an internet for everyone. Prior to joining the Internet Society, Campbell was founder and lead consultant of Campbell Communications, a strategic communications agency specializing in policy advocacy, political campaigns, and working with indigenous communities to promote community-led internet access solutions. Next, we have Joseph Lorenzo Hall, a distinguished technologist, strong internet at the Internet Society. He leads the Strong Internet portfolio, including projects on encryption, routing security, and the Internet way of networking. Prior to joining the Internet Society in 2019, he was the chief technologist and director of the Internet Architecture Project at the Center for Democracy and Technology. And finally, we have me, who I am the moderator of this panel. My name is Chelsea Horne. I am a senior professorial lecturer here at American University. And let's just jump right into it. So the first question I have is to sort of set the stage for us here. So to get us started, could you tell us a little bit about what you're working on at the moment? So actually, let's stick with that one. So tell us, what are you working on? What are some of your interests?
Shall I go first? First of all, I want to send my apologies from my boss, Sally Wentworth, who was supposed to be here but could not because of travel issues. And thank you, Jolly et al., for capturing this wonderful thing. Thank you so much. So what are we working on? I must say I'm really excited that we have a very full plate for 2024. It's almost daunting, but I'll mention a couple of areas that are particularly exciting to me right now. We have this thing called Pulse, pulse.internetsociety.org. It's an internet measurement platform. We don't measure stuff sort of originally our own, but we take a bunch of data, stick into a blender, and then visualize it. And so we have a whole bunch of really cool things in the Pulse platform, including a new way of calculating the costs due to internet shutdown. So you can go put in what country you're interested in, how long the internet shutdown lasts, and it will give you an econometrically valid estimate of how much money was lost and how many jobs you basically lost permanently by turning the internet off for that amount of time. We also have country reports now. You can go pick your favorite country and it'll give you a whole set of gorgeously visualized data about that country's internet, including resilience, including porosity, how many links does it have, all sorts of really cool stuff. Routing security, if you're interested in that. On the encryption side, we face, and I can talk about this later, but I'll just tee it up. We face the ongoing crypto war of trying to convince people that we should be able to keep secrets from governments and that you should not backdoor communications protocols. But on the exciting side, not on the defensive side, we're building new encryption protocols, new primitives, new things we can use to do really, really fantastical stuff. For example, I'm trying to phrase this perfectly. Back in around 2000, the United States government really had this problem of wanting to match a list of terrorists with a list of plane passengers. But you don't want the plane company to have your list, and you don't want the government to have your list of passengers. So we have this technique called private set intersection, very fancy set of mathematical techniques that allow you to share information and match the stuff, but never actually share the information. Anyway, there's a whole bunch of really cool things we're using that are built into like the devices you're using right now. For example, Apple Private iCloud Relay is a way of bouncing your connection off of a point between you and where you're going so that it looks like it's not coming from where you're coming from. And that's live in every iOS device right now and hides your MAC address. I'll stop there.
Yes, please.
Thanks, Joe. So I also work at the Internet Society, and just to give a bit of context to some of the cool things that Joe is talking about now, the Internet Society, for those that might not know, we were created in 1992 by some of the creators of the Internet, and we were actually created to make sure that the Internet could grow and continue to be for everyone who wanted to have access. So a lot of ISOC's history over the years has involved supporting the growth of the internet, and one of the ways that we have done this is to support community-driven internet solutions to bring fast, affordable, reliable internet to different communities who might be on the lesser fortunate side of the digital divide. So ISOC has a long history of supporting these kinds of solutions, and actually this is what brought me to the Internet Society, because I was living I'm based in Canada, and at the time I was living in the subarctic in a small community called Hay River, and I was deeply familiar with some of the challenges to fast, affordable internet access, and I started ISOC because I fell in love with its mission. I saw how behind some of the, one of the largest geographical parts of the country is, and really saw an opportunity to make an impact on the folks around me by supporting some of these solutions. So that's some of what initially led me to ISOC, but actually what I've been working on most recently has been ISOC's efforts to protect and defend the internet, which unfortunately we've having to turn to more and more these days. So, despite the decades worth of amazing work that the world has seen to grow the internet and make sure folks could have access to the internet, we're also seeing increasing decisions by governments, businesses, that could unintentionally harm the internet. And I mean, some of these are because of real challenges that we see on the internet, things like online harms, misinformation. Governments worldwide, especially ones that have had the internet for a while, are really starting to grapple with some ways to find solutions to deal with the horrible stuff that happens in society that is sometimes amplified online. So what I work on with the Internet Society as of late is to try and be a resource to governments to help them understand how can they go about some of these solutions that they're looking at in ways that doesn't harm the internet, ways that doesn't undo the many decades worth of connectivity work because of some misguided decision that really forgets what the internet needs to exist in the first place. So one of the things I'm proudest about that I've had an opportunity to work with ISOC on is working with the team to develop the Internet Impact Assessment Toolkit. This is a really unique framework that helps us and policymakers and anyone who wants to use it to really look at decisions, whether they're pieces of legislation or business decisions, and really consistently analyze how might something impact the internet, both what it needs to exist in the first place and what it needs to thrive as an open, globally connected, secure, and trustworthy internet. And a lot of that involves supporting some of the cool stuff that Joe just talked about.
Wow, you guys are a tough act to follow. I've got a new book coming out, which Chelsea briefly mentioned, called The Secret Life of Data. It's coming out in April from MIT Press. And the basic premise of the book is that we can't predict what the afterlives of the data that are being ravenously collected and analyzed today are going to be. So most of the policy that we are trying to develop right now around data are about first-order consequences. How do we stop police from getting our ISP records in order to pin crimes on us? How do we prevent advertisers from developing highly targeted profiles of us so that they can send us more compelling ads or even worse, political disinformation? Those are all really important questions, but those only treat the issue of what happens to the data that are being collected about us today. The reality is that those data are being voraciously collected and then stored in all kinds of databases where they're saved against the day that there are new forensic techniques, new interpretive valences, and new data sets to merge them with. And longer term, the secondary and tertiary lives of those data have all kinds of social and political and cultural consequences that nobody can predict today. And unless we think longer term about the lives that our data live, we're going to get stuck in this kind of doom cycle of surveilling ourselves to death and creating systems of cybernetic control over social processes that cut human agency more and more out of the equation. So the book focuses on documenting a lot of these kind of unexpected longer-term consequences of data collection and analysis, but also focuses on various kinds of interventions that can build our agency and rebuild democratic norms and cultural innovation inside of this hyper-surveillant environment. And those interventions are everything from policies to resistant technologies to new cultural trends and subcultural ideas. So that's a big part of what I'm working on right now. I'm also working on something that is relevant to the ISOC population, which is looking at the Fediverse, ActivityPub, and the protocols that underlie platforms like Mastodon and PixelFed. And I'm actually working with doctoral student Thomas Struett, who's here in the audience, as well as some other colleagues of ours at the School of Communication here at American University and up at York University in Canada. And basically, what our research does is it looks at historical analogs, other examples of open networks and platforms that have been subverted or that have otherwise kind of fallen by the wayside and failed to deliver on their civic promises. And what the research asks is how, knowing what we know about the history of the internet, how can we avoid those kinds of pitfalls and allow the Fediverse to deliver on its civic promise to be a truly decentralized and democratically governed social media space, in contrast to all of the kind of legacy commercial social media platforms. The third and final thing that I'll mention is I've been working a lot on research at the intersection of AI and identity. And I was actually telling some folks before the panel started about how I'm working, I'm a Jewish American, and I've been working with some other Jewish scholars about how, about the challenges of navigating Jewish identity in the face of platforms like ChatGPT and DALL-E 2, which reduce identity signifiers to a bunch of kind of empty symbols that not only fail to capture the nuances of all of our complex identities, but actually, to the extent that these platforms get integrated into our communications platforms, like our email platforms, or our production platforms like Microsoft Word or Photoshop, they begin to supplant a more nuanced and organic identity building process with these really reductionist and in many ways offensive and disturbing kind of ontologies that divide us from one another and will not allow us to develop multifaceted intersectional identities. And the sad thing about this particular story is that some of my colleagues in the academy decided that they did not want to participate in a panel about this because they're so worried about their Jewish identity being a liability that they won't call these platforms to account for turning that identity into a liability. So this is, I think, a challenge that we don't even have a language for yet, and part of what we're attempting to do in our research is to put these ideas on the table so that we can actually begin to talk about it before it's too late.
Thank you. So we will return to the challenges and obstacles because those are the things at the forefront, and that's where we can start working to make change and improvements. But the panel is titled Innovation for Good. So I do want to take a moment to, I'll combine two questions here. So the first part is, what are some of the recent and emerging technology innovations or internet areas that you are following that you find exciting? And what are the opportunities and the possibilities present within them? So basically, pick an area of the internet that you are interested in following right now, and let's talk about the good stuff that's happening. So where are we going? What's happening that's working, that's good, our opportunities and our possibilities?
Absolutely. So one of the things that's happening that's really good is it's never been easier to get encryption keys to protect your online stuff. So there's a group called the Let's Encrypt, which issues millions of encrypted certificates every day I'm really excited about that, even though we're getting to the point where it's almost 95% of all traffic is encrypted on the web, which is amazing. But the reason that it makes me excited is because we can move on to other problems we have. And another problem we have that is really exciting to me that I'm going to try and motivate is called memory safety. This is one where the idea being we have not been able to write software that doesn't have bugs. Software is full of bugs. Powerful people use bugs to break into devices against your will all the time around the world. It's unfortunate. One way to get rid of a huge whole entire class of software flaws is by using a type of software programming languages that just won't allow you to make certain kinds of mistakes. It sounds really simple to say that out loud, that, hey, just use languages that don't allow you to make these kinds of mistakes. But because we've spent 30 years building tons of stuff on top of things that were built on buggy code all the way down, it's going to take a lot of work. And so there's an effort amongst a lot of folks. This is more of a personal thing. Internet Society doesn't yet work on memory safety. I got plans. But this is something where we have people around the world understanding the technical debt that we have racked up by every device being riddled with bugs. It's time to change that. And it's time to do that by making sure that we systematically make these kinds of changes. So I'll put one up for memory safety. It may be the most nerdy, exciting thing here, but it's definitely exciting to me.
It's all nerdy.
We're allowed to nerd out, right?
Absolutely, please.
Excellent. Well, I also am a fan of security, but what I'll do is I'll talk about one of the things I'm excited about and try very hard not to go about all of the fears I have that...
Not yet. You have plenty of time in just a moment.
I'll hold back. So coming back to internet connectivity, I think it's been really exciting to see some of the advancements in technology that are helping us get fast internet to some of the hardest to connect places in the world. I mentioned before I spent a lot of time in Canada's Northwest Territories, which is in the subarctic, and thinking about the challenges that some of these, the communities in places such as the Northwest Territories, similar challenges in Nunavut, Alaska. A lot of remote communities, often flying communities, have had a really hard time getting fast, affordable internet, and even just thinking about how do we support community-driven solutions that could be more affordable. The physical barriers to getting backhaul or things like fiber up to some of these communities is just challenging on so many levels, right? Like economically, it's super expensive to lay fiber down some of the most challenging terrain that could be rock and snow and whatsoever. But also, there's not that much economic incentive for some of the existing telcos to build infrastructure to perhaps serve a community of 300 people. However, one of the technologies that I'm particularly excited about in terms of supporting more community-driven networks is low Earth orbit satellites. So when it came to ISOC, it was primarily one of the first community networks. We were working with a community called Uluhaktuk to start looking at in terms of, is this something that's possible? It's an Arctic community. There's 400 people now. Where are we going to get backhaul? We looked at satellite options, we looked at different things, and we still face the big hurdle of expensive backhaul. But one of the, what we ended up with as a solution 4 years later, there was many delays because of COVID restricting our entry in the community. We ended up using a Starlink connection as backhaul, which was more than enough to supply the community with fast internet, given the size of the community, right? And so, Starlink, one Starlink account was the actual backhaul, and it was distributed over a wireless network that we fortunately got Spectrum license to use. And now everyone in the community, 400 people, has the option of free internet if they want it based on that one connection, and it's more than enough for anyone. And you don't have to be in someone's house to get it. You could, like, the span of connectivity within a community is quite large. And they're already thinking about, okay, where are we going to put the next point? so that they can expand that even more, which is, the one thing that surprised me and that keeps me inspired about the advancements in this kind of technology is just the unique ways that this is helping communities, right? Part of our the research that we were doing and understanding how this is useful for the community, we asked every single person we talked to, what are you the most excited about in having a free access internet solution? And everyone said, check the weather. And we're like, oh, interesting. But when you think about the reason for that, I mean, this is a community, it's an Inuvialuit community. There's different Inuit folks that live there, but they largely rely on traditional food gathering practices, which includes hunting, fishing, berries, etc. And that means going on the land. And when you don't have a cellular connection, or if you don't have means of communication, how are you going to get help? And so it was really interesting to see not just the way that this kind of solution is being used for emergency response, but also in how it's helping them be more strategic in terms of securing food and getting help.
I think there's a lot to be excited about right now, and there's a lot of innovation not only at the infrastructural level but also at the social level. One of the ideas that Jesse Gilbert, my co-author, and I write about in our book is what we call crowdsourced stewardship, I think is the term that we arrived on it. And the basic idea is this. There are all these independent initiatives out there where instead of a big organization or a big government agency setting up a surveillance network, networks to monitor environmental systems are being established by citizen scientists. So there's something called like the Great Fireball Observatory, where tens of thousands of people with their individual cell phone cameras capture footage of shooting stars. And then for the first time in human history, we're able to triangulate where meteors are landing and track them down and analyze them. There are other ones like FathomNet, which is a network of tens of thousands of independently run sensors keeping track of ocean salinity and heat and currents. There's another one called ForestNet, where people are keeping track of the health of forests. All of these large global environmental systems that there's no profit motive to build a surveillance network for the way that we do in, say, inner city America, are gaining not only the same kind of coverage and surveillance so that we can keep track of the changes in our environment due to climate change, but they also exemplify a kind of collaboration via AI that commercial services don't show you. So, for instance, there's a service called ShotSpotter that some of you might have read about that is one company that puts always-on microphones in cities. And when somebody fires a gun, they triangulate where the sound is coming from and they report it to the local police department. Well, gee, that sounds really great. But the only problem is that Motherboard did an investigation, and what they found was that ShotSpotter was actually altering the data to fit the police narrative about who shot a gun and when, rather than encouraging police departments to follow the data and maybe not pin crimes on people who didn't fit the fact pattern. The nice thing about these crowdsourced stewardship networks is that that's impossible. Because they have to reconcile the diverse viewpoints and triangulate the diverse data of thousands of individual contributors, this presents a model for AI representation of shared cultural and physical space that is in contrast to these kind of top-down, for lack of a better term, hegemonic systems of surveillance that pervade so much of our social space right now. So even though these are, at this point in time, really underfunded, highly distributed environmental sensor models, I think they indicate a way forward where we can integrate tools like AI and ubiquitous surveillance into our society in a way that doesn't necessarily disempower members of a democratic society, and will allow us to integrate multiple vantage points and multiple stakeholders' needs into the digital tools that we use to accelerate the flow of data through our social organizations.
I think it's so important for us to be thinking about what are the good things, especially people who are researchers, scholars, people who work with and for the internet, that sometimes we just take for granted, yes, there are good things, and we just lump it all together as a positive, and then we say, let's focus on the harms and the challenges, because that's how we move forward. So those are absolutely important questions, but I think it's so helpful to ground all of our conversations in what's working, like what's good, and remind ourselves of that. Even as, and as I'm segueing to our next question here, we grapple with the seemingly unending potential for obstacles, challenges, harms. So what are maybe the examples that you picked here, some of the obstacles and challenges that we see on the other hand of all these wonderful, great things that are happening? So perhaps there are many to choose from. So maybe what are the ones that you think are the most important, critically urgent challenges of our moment?
Yeah, that's a deep question, because there are a lot of challenges. I often talk about the internet as being a very sharp double-edged sword, and the good side is just as sharp as the bad side. And the things that I think I'm particularly worried about are, I would just say, around the inevitable perennial ignorance that we see regulators around the world who really have something in their sights, but the hammer they're using to be able to accomplish what they want is just far, far fit for purpose. And like a really good example is the United Kingdom is about to amend something called the Investigatory Powers Act, which allows a whole bunch of things to happen. For example, secret orders to businesses to change how their technology works for a law enforcement aim, right? And it's not strong enough, it's not aggressive enough, so they're going to amend it. And right now, the amendments include things that are very, very mysterious that will have to come to light at some point. But right now, they say things like dangerous new routing technologies. And let me tell you, those new routing technologies are things like encrypted DNS, right? Over the past 4 or 5 years, we've never had the ability to have security around your DNS queries, the phone book of the internet that we've had until we had something called DNS over HTTPS, or DOE, to be cute about it. And so I'm really worried that things get lumped together because they need to sell a certain kind of political position. There's just going to be a whole lot of collateral damage that's hard to quantify, but it's hard to see how to stop it all, I guess.
All right. Where do I begin? So similar to what we just heard and what I mentioned before, what I worry about is that we are going to forget what the internet needs to exist when governments in particular are trying to tackle some of the very big challenges that we're seeing online, which are often societal issues being amplified. And so I mean, one of the exercises we had to do at the beginning of this year at the Internet Society is to think about, well, what are all these challenges? What are some of the trends we're observing, and where should we place our focus most? And while, as Joseph mentioned before, we've been, supporting the use of encryption, and a lot of the, threats that we focused on in years past is laws that try to reduce online harms online, but do so in a way that might undermine our ability to use things like encryption. But there's kind of been a whole other more global threat that has recently emerged as of October last year, which was when the USTR announced that they would no longer be supporting certain digital policies in World Trade Organization negotiations that they've previously supported in the past. Things like, preventing mandated data localization, preventing efforts to mandate revealing of source code, things like data flow restrictions. The United States has actually prevented a lot of those bad ideas from sparking in different countries through trade policy and other areas as well. It's always been a strong supporter of an open internet. So what worried us is that when the USTR made this announcement last year, that this is kind of going to be a signal to a lot of other countries who are perhaps thinking of these ideas. Excuse me, I'm having allergy issues here. Bad timing. So what we're worried about is that the U.S. backing down from its protecting and defending the internet, particularly in trade negotiations, is going to be a signal to other countries that they can go about things like mandated data localization and other bad ideas in efforts to control the information that flows between networks. And what this will ultimately do is just raise new digital walls that undermine the seamless nature of the internet. And the more digital walls that raise on the internet, the more that it more or less fractures the internet. You might have heard of the term internet fragmentation. This is the biggest internet fragmentation, I think, that we're facing right now, is the influence of the U.S. stopping to protect and defend the internet is going to have a negative influence on other countries who are trying to figure out what their approach to data governance is, and perhaps doing so in a way that doesn't protect what the internet needs to exist in the first place. And very rapidly, if we continue down this path, we will see the erosion of the global internet. It's quite alarming.
Yeah. There's a lot that keeps me up at night. The thing that I think we are not talking enough about is the fact that we're adding our physical bodies to the stack faster than we are developing data privacy regimes. And the potential uses and misuses of those data are extreme. There's already, everybody now knows the story of somebody who discovered a long-lost sibling because somebody they're related to put their genetic profile on 23andMe. This has happened in my family. It happened in the family of my co-author. It happened in the family of one of my grad students who I interviewed in my new book. That's pretty disruptive, but that's really the tip of the iceberg. More concerning, and I was chatting with some folks before the panel about this, is like the new move towards what are called DNA phenotypes, where, for instance, in China right now, they're building what's sometimes referred to as an ethnic alarm or a Uyghur alarm, where the DNA profiles of a particular ethnic group is analyzed, and then projected facial features from those DNA are modeled, and then those projected facial features are fed into facial recognition software, which is applied to continent-spanning surveillance camera networks, and then all of a sudden police are empowered to pull people over on the street for suspected identification with a particular ethnic group. In the case of China right now, the Uyghurs, of whom there are 1 million in concentration camps already, and another 10 million threatened with being put in concentration camps if they're identified, let alone the false identifications. But even above and beyond that, I mean, I wear this thing. I see a bunch of other biometric wearable devices in the room. Think about like what SCL did, Cambridge Analytica, during the 2016 election with neurotargeting. For those of you who didn't follow this story, basically they used Facebook quizzes and apps that were distributed by houses of worship to identify people who had neurotic tendencies, and then they being, in this case, Russia, targeted disinformation, political disinformation, at those people who had been identified as neurotic and susceptible to disinformation, and encouraged them to do things like not vote, or to show up and violently protest in various places at various times. That was just with some personality tests and some intimate interpersonal communications between pastors and parishioners. That was at the psychological level. Now imagine adding the physical level to that process, and imagine neuro-targeting based on actual big data about your neurology. I think that is a very real, very immediate threat that is probably, if I were working at SCL, I would be very interested in mining those kinds of data towards those kinds of ends. I think now that we have opened this permeable door between our biological existence and our data selves, the potential for political and cultural havoc is incalculable. That scares the bejesus out of me. The other thing the grenade I'll drop into the conversation, that again, you only see an article about this once in a while, but the quantum cliff is very real. So all of these encrypted communications that we're all vaunting that are essential to democratic processes, to our relationship with healthcare providers, relationship with financial organizations. Every HTTPS transaction of information on the web is being stored because it's traveling along the open internet, even though it's encrypted, and will be decryptable with sufficiently powerful quantum computers, probably within a decade, by anybody with the money and the interest to do so, of which the number is legion. So there is coming a day of reckoning where all of these things that we've been transacting with the expectation that it is utterly private and secret will be not only revealed, but will ultimately at some point be archived and searchable for everybody for perpetuity. That to me is a mind-blowing thought that should be part of our regular conversation about the future of the internet.
All right, so to wrap us up on this roller coaster of positive challenges, where we're going back and... Okay. Okay, so we'll end on a positive question for us, and then we'll do a couple of Q&A. Yes. We're back, I think, yes? Okay, fantastic. So the two questions here will kind of combine together. Looking forward, where would you like to see the internet and its respective technologies moving toward? So we can take that question if you like. Or what are some things that individuals or as a collective that we can do to help move the internet, again, its respective technologies towards good?
Yeah, I'm trying to figure out which one I should take. I think I'll go with what people can do towards moving the internet towards good. I think just as my last comments, I talked about ignorance and sort of the inability to grapple with understanding the things that we are using and the tools that we're using. I think on the same side, it's up to us, those of us who recognize the good, to not only encourage folks to dig a little bit deeper, but also come up with ways that we can talk about the good of the internet that really folds people's brains. I talk often about if you went to elementary school in the United States and you end up finding yourself on fire in the future, you know what to do. You stop, drop, and roll. And that's because firemen come in, firewomen, fire people come into your class as a kid and teach you this. And it's designed to be a sticky form of communication that once it's in your head, it's very hard to kick out of your head. So can we find ways that fold people's brains, that have them thinking, oh, no, wait a sec, you want to do that? But wait, you can do that, but what about this? We need to build ways that some of these things become a little bit more intuitive, and that oh, the internet's all bad is not something that people are like, yeah, that person's full of it, right? Here's things I do every day that help me fulfill my life and that of my community.
So I'll take the same question, but I think that, the best thing that people can do to make sure the internet keeps moving towards good is to make sure that there's an internet in the first place. And in addition to, just getting educated and understanding what the internet needs to exist in the first place, I think what folks need to do now is to encourage their leaders to protect and defend the internet, whether it's trade negotiations, whether it's developing a new piece of legislation. We need to make sure our leaders are protecting and defending the internet. and doing things like internet impact assessments before making decisions that could impact the internet to mitigate harm to the internet. It's critical. I think everybody should be shouting this, and especially after with what's happening now in trade negotiations, the challenge is insurmountable unless everyone stands up for the internet. Otherwise, in the very near future, I fear that there might not be an internet at all, or at least not one based on the foundation as it was meant to be created for everyone. I'll end there.
It's so interesting because when we're talking about challenges and when we're talking about innovations, we tend to talk about the technologies. But when you asked us to talk about what we're supposed to do about it, the proposed interventions are normative and cultural, right? We need to talk differently about the internet. We need to inculcate a sense of the inherent social value of the internet and talk about it as this shared valuable resource like our environment, right? And I think that's true. I think that the challenge is, and how many of you are on Mastodon? Mastodon. So one, I see in the audience, who's the person who's writing the article about Mastodon with me, right? Oh, two, Jolly's on Mastodon. Thank you, Jolly. From an infrastructural standpoint, Mastodon and ActivityPub and the Fediverse writ large are a no-brainer, right? They provide all of the social and civic utility that Facebook and Shitter and the rest of these commercial platforms offer, with none of the surveillance capitalism, none of the rigged algorithms, none of the kind of pitfalls that have led to these becoming toxic, not only end-user platforms, but infrastructural technologies over the past 10 years, right? And yet nobody's using it. And so I'm very interested to understand what the obstacle is between the this kind of socio-technical value of a platform like that and the cultural conversation and discourse around that platform. Right now, my understanding, like I know a ton of people that have gone over to Blue Sky, which again is kind of a billionaire-run fake decentralized platform that also has a totally obscure algorithm that ostensibly gives you some controls over it. And the reason people are there is because it feels familiar. Because the people that they admire, the influencers that they admire, were given early beta access to it, because the interface mimics what Twitter used to be. And so there's this kind of like momentum, ease of transition. And I think as long as ease and simplicity and convenience and clout are the ultimate values that determine our engagement with the internet, we are doomed to keep repeating our past failures over and over and over again. So the real question becomes, how do we talk about civic value of the platform without sounding like a bunch of pointy-headed, like know-everything ivory tower wonks who nobody wants to interact with because like we'll be preaching all the time and not like talking about fun memes and you know, Travis Kelce or whatever his name is, and like who did, you know, this pop star sleep with, which is what people really want to talk about. So yeah, how do you make civics sexy? That's the short version of it. And I don't know the answer, but I wish I did.
Well, what a great note to end on here, and we'll open it up to a couple of audience Q&As. So who has a burning question? Yes, please.
Wait, please
oh, actually,
wait for the mic.
No, but
We want you on the internet.
yes.
The subject of quantum computing has been brought up, and it's one of the great changes to the technology that we're now facing. And humans have gone through many dramatic changes in technology and survived and prospered after movable type and broadcasting and computing and all that sort of stuff. But this is a highly disruptive, technology, as has already been pointed out. You know, it will be able to figure out my password in less than a second, and will be able to decrypt any encryption that we know today in maybe about a second. So, you know, the power of it is just mind-boggling. What I try to imagine, however, and I think it's useful to ask the panelists to imagine a world 10 years from now, and sometimes we get surprised that things happen faster than we think, and sometimes they take longer, you know, but it seems inevitable at this point. What are the good things? I can imagine the terrifying things from quantum computing, but what are the good things, and what will a world look like 15 years from now in which quantum computing is commonly used, and we're surrounded by it? So this is obviously speculative, but your speculation would be interesting because it is so important.
I'll come up with one very specific answer. Pharmaceutical innovation, protein folding, the development of new therapeutic interventions for intractable diseases. Quantum computing is going to be great for that, right? Because it's of course, the devil's in the details, and it depends what kinds of operating systems and software you build on top of it. But the capacity to build an analytical regime that considers all of the different permutations of a given set of problems and optimizes for an outcome out of all of those permutations, that's great for challenges like curing disease. Also great for challenges like geoengineering, right? Figuring out how to minimize the warming of the oceans and the melting of the ice caps, and interrupt some of these feedback loops that we've got caught inside, in part because we don't understand the mathematics well enough. So that's assuming good actors using the technology toward socially positive ends, which is a big if.
Someone else is going to need it in a moment anyway. So I'm of the school of what I will call Garfinkel and Hufnagel, who are two scholars who wrote a book called The Law and Policy of Quantum Technologies. And it's very well written. And the punchline is quantum sensing and quantum communication are going to be way more relevant than quantum computing sooner than anyone's going to be able to do any kind of meaningful quantum computation for things that we care about, like factoring numbers for encryption and stuff like that. And quantum sensing, you're already seeing everywhere. And these are things that will use like single photon emitters and stuff like that. And a lot of these things are used in military technologies first. And so like the HIMARS missile system that we've given to Ukraine uses an ungodly number of quantum sensing technologies so that it's unjammable but can still land a missile within 3 meters of its intended target. And so they use these things called ring lasers, which is just a laser shooting back on itself, and it can tell wherever it turns with unbelievable accuracy. You can buy these on Alibaba, by the way, if you want to play with them. They're kind of fun. But those kinds of things, like, for example, being able to see around corners by using reconstruction of single photon emitters. And there's things that are going to blow your mind way sooner than anyone's going to factor a big number. Absolutely. The biggest number we factored so far is 15, 1, 3, 5, 15, right? That's not terribly interesting yet. But the pace that people are putting money into this is amazing. And right now, the big bugaboo is China. They're the only country that's investing all by itself because they have the capability of investing all by themselves, whereas the rest of us have to get our resources together and so necessarily have to innovate in the open. But I highly recommend that book because it's sort of throws cold water on worrying too much about quantum computing. There is this latent data thing where people are storing ungodly. It's called The Law and Policy of Quantum Technologies by Simpson Garfinkel and Chris Hufnagel. Anyway.
And we have time for one more question.
Yeah, I may go ahead. Oh, well, thank you very much, Aram, Natalie, and Joseph for your insight today. I'm actually part of the youth standing group of the Internet Society, so it's great to be here with you all. I'm actually coming from Colombia, so it's great to be here. Thank you very much. Also, used to be a former youth ambassador, so it's great to see you all. Now, just very quick question, precisely regarding youth. I think an important point that you touched today is how we need civics, how we need culture, how we need to make a change on how we teach technologies to people. And I think the youth is especially vulnerable to a lot of it, maybe precisely because we're using more and we're more, to a certain extent, part of the new technologies that we're using. We're more dependent in many different ways on how technology evolves, how we're using the internet, how we're using platforms, and so on and so forth. But maybe I would like to know, what do you think we should have into account when we're addressing these issues for young people? How we can, for example, protect children, teenagers, and young people of these new, let's say, challenges that arise with these new technologies. Thank you very much.
Okay. So I actually spend a lot of time thinking about how can we help keep you safe online. Not, yes, as part of my day job when I look at different government approaches to online safety, but also as a mom of 2 kids, one who is 9 and one who is 11. And so I find myself thinking about this a lot, and also, coming from an angle that I want my kids to be able to use the internet, to be able to, have it support the different creative ideas that they have, and to also at the same time make sure that they're doing so in a safe and responsible way. So the answer I generally give on things like online safety is that there's not just one entity's responsibility to keep kids safe online. It's not just the government's job. It's not just my job. We need to make holistic. We need to come at it in a holistic kind of way. Schools need to be teaching not just how to use the internet, but also what does the internet need to exist in the first place, and how can you have safe experiences online? This needs to be baked in from the start. But at the same time, so do parents. And parents need to be, very proactive in not just understanding the internet, but also what the challenges are and how to be safe online, and having conversations with their kids to, establish, boundaries that make sense for whoever's just, your respective household. So that's kind of how I think about these things. Is not just one person's job or one thing that we can do to keep kids safer online. I think it's a community responsibility, and so we have to start thinking about community approaches to solutions.
So I have 2 teenagers, and I've struggled with this as an internet enthusiast and advocate, and also somebody who knows what could go wrong. And I've seen some things go wrong with my kids and with the friends of my kids. The internet's really good at doing things like rewarding suicidal ideation and rewarding sexualized self-presentation. In my experience as a parent, the best tools that I've discovered are the 1-2 punch of a strong regulatory environment protecting kids' data on one side, and a strong and engaged family dynamic that, and I don't mean family dynamic in the sense of like the Family Research Council, it's got to be like one of each gender, and I just mean people who love each other, who are helping to raise the kids. Inculcating enough of a sense of self-respect and mutual respect to kind of serve as like an operating system for. We know for certain, first of all, that our kids today are always like much more versed in the in the vernaculars of internet engagement than we are, right? They speak meme in a way that we don't speak. And no matter how much we study it, I mean, I've been studying this stuff my entire adult life, and I don't understand it as well as my 14-year-old does, right? And but what I can help my 14-year-old understand is that being cruel to somebody online is the same as being cruel to somebody in person. That if you're not taking somebody's feelings into account, that if you meet somebody who says that they are one kind of person, don't look to what they say, look to what they do. Those kinds of fundamental and I'm going to go back to the word civic, like civic understandings of how to be a human being in the company of other human beings will serve through many socio-technical changes as a base set of conditions for people to engage safely on the internet.
So it is a great place to stop. So thank you all for your wonderful questions. Thank you to my esteemed panel for your great and thoughtful remarks. Thank you for joining us both online and in person. And we'll conclude here. So thank you all.
So thank you all for coming. So for you live stream viewers, we're going to stop the live stream now. And it's going to go into the AGM. We'll just have a couple minutes break before that. And and if you want to get on the AGM, go to isocdc.org and you'll find the Zoom link. Thank you.